Hey guys, welcome to another episode of How To with the Caribbean Gaffer, powered by 13 Degrees North Rentals. Now, in today's episode, we are going to be discussing more of the fundamentals of the how to of sound. And with me today is Travis Springer. Travis, one of the last jobs we would have worked on was directed by Kwame Manap. Nice production coming out of Barbados, and you would be sound recordist on that show as well. Kwame was actually a part of the How To series in season 2. So if you missed that, you could actually go and check out season 2 of How To and look for Kwame Lestrade. In that, that was a fantastic project, and we're working together on that. Obviously, we've been doing lighting, you were doing sound, and within that series, there will be a number of challenges and a number of situations that we would have to apply different techniques in terms of capturing the best audio. And within various situations or scenarios, there are various tools that you have to utilize. So for our viewers out there that might not understand when to use things or how to use certain pieces of equipment, we're going to walk you through that now in this episode. So you can walk through on how to capture your best sound and tools you would necessarily need or to use in those various scenarios.
So you remember we talked about reverb and bigger rooms and that type of stuff in a previous discussion, but when we're outdoors, we tend to use the longer shotgun. It has a longer throw, which means that it picks up sound from further distance.
Right.
But it may not necessarily be good for indoors. As you can see, this has an interference tube, which means sound is going to come in from different various points of it. The dome, I would say one of the, not negative, but it doesn't perform as well as the shorter one, the less interference tube, and the throw is not as long, so it doesn't pick up the reflections as much as this would.
Right.
This is really good for outdoors. This is really good for indoors. Where we discussed earlier about reflections, and when we talk reflections, we talk about reverb, and reflections pretty much being sound bouncing off the wall coming back to you, which is an echo or reverb, right? Correct. So reflections. This has more. As you can see, more slits at the side, more interference tube, so it will pick up more of those reflections of reverb rather than the short one. This might perform better outdoors because you're outdoors, there's not much reflections.
Correct.
Right? And this has a longer throw, which means you can be further away and still get a really good sound.
Right.
Limitations, obviously indoors, you can't be too far, you're limited by ceilings.
Ceiling heights and space.
Correct.
On the whole.
Correct. So then this would perform better, and so it's just different microphones for the different situations, different scenarios.
Right. Now moving away from the microphones, because I think obviously it's a lav, so lavs and then shotguns are what we generally tend to use on production. But then we get into file formats and do I multi-track? Do I just use a mono mix? Do I just use stereo? How does one determine if they should do that or if they shouldn't do that? So for example, if we're doing an interview, the two of us here,
correct,
right? Do we do multi-track for that, or do we just do a left and right mix, or do we just say, okay, I can put both labs or one receiver into the camera, and then use two transmitters, which we know that we can do, and just record a mono stereo, a mono signal. Sorry. What is your advice to situations, or what would you tell viewers out there when to do what and when not to do the next?
I would always say the more options you have, the better. So if you have no choice but to record two separate labs, like in this case, into one track, and you have no choice, by all means, I would just say make sure that you set both your levels properly. We talked about this,
right,
to ensure that because when you come to edit, there's no separation of them. It's in one track and they're both burnt in, as we would say.
Correct.
Right. If you can do separate recordings, I would always advise you do that. In this case, we could record stereo for two of us because, as we know, stereo is two tracks, a left and a right.
And a left and a right.
So in a scenario like this, if you only have a stereo, only able to record stereo, I would pan me left and you right, or vice versa. And yes, it would record a stereo track, but once you get into post in many of your video editing softwares, you can separate those channels, the left and the right.
Correct.
And essentially that means you've multi-tracked. Now you have two isolated tracks. I'm on the left, you're on the right, and separated. That's me and that's you. And we can adjust the levels depending on what you need to. So
right.
Then obviously you have more than two sources. then it gets into
Gray areas,
Yes.
where you have more than two sources, but you are only able to have a mixer that does stereo.
stereo.
Right, and then you have 4 or 5 channels of audio
Yes.
to mix down into
Into
a stereo,
a stereo
mix.
mix.
Then, what would you say to somebody who's in that scenario, or would you advise them to A, get a sound recorder like this, or B, get a sound recordist?
Right. It also depends on the level that you're at. You know, a lot of people won't be able to afford a sound recorder or external mixer like this. But I would always say to be sure what you're recording. So if you know you have a host and someone's going to be playing, that's an automatic. Put one to the left, put one to the right, so that you have the host on separate. And you know, if it's a instance where there's a script, and you can read the script and memorize the script and say, okay, well, these two people never speak at the same time. I can put them on the same side on the right. If there's an overlap, if these two people are speaking at the same time, then we would want to put them on separate sides, left and right. That's in the case you can only record stereo.
Right.
But I would always advise look to invest in a small handheld recorder that can do four channels. There's some nice ones out there, cheaper, that are affordable, that can do 4 or 5 channels.
Right. So we could always start with a 4-channel recorder.
Yes, correct.
Whether a Tascam, a Zoom, or whatever. Four channels is easy enough to accomplish.
manage, yeah.
But then you get into larger and more professional sound, then is when we then look at
More professional.
more professional grade
recorders
and brands. So for example, right here, right now is a 663. The sound device is 663.
633.
633, sorry, which is your
Yes.
recorder. Why did you invest in this?
Well, so this machine here, it not only does 6 channels of audio, which you can have 6 live, 6 people speaking. It's also the output capabilities, the formats in terms of media, in terms of metadata that it has. You can input data, you can input time code, any information about any scene we're recording, even track names. Right? So now we've gone ahead of, and we can also mix. We can turn down, we can turn up as we see fit. So once you get to this level, then it's more about managing your audio signal coming in, going out, who needs to hear, and the information metadata that we spoke about, formats.
Right. Now, within the realm of formats, because now you've mentioned formats. I know, well, obviously there are various formats out there. For you who don't know, sound can be recorded in multiple formats and outputted in multiple formats. Now, this 633, the formats that this has would be what? MP4?
So we can do MP3.
MP3, sorry.
We can do Wave. We can do different variations of that MP3 as well. So we can do 320 kilobits per second down to 128.
128,
We
right.
can do Wave.
Right, and just so that the viewers understand, you get, depending on the format you use, will determine the amount of file size or the amount of information that will be embedded into that file. So 128 being one of the largest file formats will always be larger than a 24-bit or 32-bit or 64-bit format.
So yeah, it just depends on your needs. This also does polywave. We were talking about multi-tracking. So
Correct.
this machine and other machines in this line will give you one file that you can easily drag into your software, and it will just open up into all of the separate tracks that you recorded, which is a polywave. So you have polywave, broadcast wave, you have the standard wave, MP3, different types of MP3s. So it just depends on what's needed for your
particular project.
Correct.
Right. And on the professional side of things, once we get into polywave and varying formats and multi-tracking, obviously multi-tracking is not, for those novices and everything, it is not quite like stems. Because I know there are some musicians that might be watching and everything that might be looking at stems for music, but it's not. Well, stems are from music and there are different parts of a track. Multi-tracking literally is Travis on one track, I am on another track.
Yes.
Tamal may be on another track, Jason may be on another track, Kwame may be on another track, and then when you get into the edit, then I'm able to isolate each and every single voice and just use that voice at that particular point in time when necessary within the shot.
It's good for editing as well because you then have more control of, hey, I didn't like that line that he spoke. I can literally cut that out.
Right.
If the person's off camera, we can cut to a different shot, cut out that line. You can change the flow of a conversation by having more options, as I said, in terms of multi-tracking, rather than just recording a stereo or mono signal.
That is great for the viewers to know. Now, also you mentioned metadata.
Yes.
That will be baked into the recording. Why do we need to use metadata?
Right. So in an instance where, if you're doing a one-off interview that's going to last half an hour, we may not necessarily need to know time of day or when it was shot. But let's say you're doing a project that spans over weeks, and we shoot. They need to find a file that was shot on day 12. And they need to know who was recorded, how long the take was for at a glance. That's why the metadata in these machines are very, very useful. We can input things like the scene number, the take number, what microphones were used. We talked about ADR. Let's say there's a scene that was recorded on day 24 of a 50-day shoot, and they want to redo one line on that day. It's better for the ADR recordist in the studio to figure out, hey, what microphones did you use on set to match it? I can input all that information here as well, and I can print some reports. I can anything you need: time code, time of day, microphones, how long it was recorded, the names of the characters for each track. Just tons of information that will help the post-production process run smoothly.
Now you just mentioned time code.
Yes.
So time code is another very, 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 very important tool that you generally use when recording. Time code can be generated with a slate, but sometimes in most instances, some people may not have a time code slate. Yeah. So then I would suggest always being able to either clap sync or just use a regular slate to
it all works.
Correct, to sync up, because editors, once again, as we've discussed in many episodes before, this is an audio-visual product, and both of them need to work in harmony. Correct. And you always need to make sure that your video and audio are in sync, and time code and generation of time code helps with that. Now, then we have to look at time code slates. We have to look at gen boxes.
Correct.
What else?
We could talk about the basic how time code works, where I'm not sure if our viewers know. It's essentially a clock. Right. So if you can imagine, we all sync our clocks at the same time, at the same place. Like we have 5 different people, we will all be on the same time. So some recorders usually have very, very good clocks in our devices. So we generate time code and we sync all the cameras to the same time. So we're all running on the same time, and in the edit, everything just, once you line up everything, it works perfect most of the time. Once we deal with frame rates and that type of thing.
Yeah, your editors will forever love you.
They will forever be grateful. Yes.
And if you've never used time code and you have multi-camera shoots, I would suggest using time code.
As Kurt was saying, as you were saying earlier too, in the advent that in the case we don't have time code, a slate or a general clap that you see people do works perfectly as well.
Now let's backtrack a little bit and let's look at, obviously we just touched on metadata, but let's look at file management from the sound perspective. As you said, if we were shooting day 50, if you wanted to pull a file from day 54 and you want to do ADR and that means that your file management system must be in such a way that the editors would be able to find it easy. How do you go about managing your files and your file management?
So the great thing about these recorders now in the digital age, I would say, is that you can create what you call a sound report, right? Built into the recorder, which essentially gives you all the information that was shot on a particular day, right? Before, people were doing it analog, so you can say, today we shot X, Y, Z, whatever time. But the great thing about these is once you input the information, the editor at any given time can see what was recorded, who recorded it, how it was recorded, any information you put in. So it's always good once you get a device like this to input as much information as you can. Scene number, take number, time code, information, what microphone.
At what point do you have time to do that?
You do it before, obviously. Remember we talked about film being a cohesive. So the script supervisor will have information like what scene number is up next. for example.
Right.
So I can look at my fellow scriptee and say, hey, what's the next scene really quickly? She can tell me scene 24 take 2, and there's plenty shortcuts that I can easily do that. I can do it on my phone. There's Bluetooth apps that connect to it, and I can input this in between setups, for example. If I know for the beginning of the day that, hey, we're gonna have Kurt and Amory on set today, and they're the 2 talent, because obviously you get
Right.
plan for the next day. I can do that before I get to set. I can do it when I get to set first thing in the morning. Set the names, put them on channel 1, channel 2, and then I'm good to go. So preparation.
To remain on the topic of data and files, what about storage in terms of medium and media? Obviously, this records on more than one storage device.
Yes.
Right, because there's SSD cards.
Well, this one is SD and CF.
Well, SD and CF. Right. Now, what about moving from here into storing and backing up? And
Right.
what advice would you have for people?
So, as we just said, this does 2 simultaneous recordings on 2 different mediums. So this can take a CF card and an SD card. To touch on that really quickly, let's say this audio needed to be sent overseas for transcription. I can simultaneously record an MP3, which we discussed is a lower format. It doesn't have as much information as the WAV, but it's a very much smaller file type. So it's easier. I can say, okay, I'm going to record the MP3 because at the end of the day, this needs to go to transcription somewhere. I need to send it at the end of the day.
Right.
So smaller file that can go to where it needs to go, but I can still record the higher resolution, the higher WAV.
Right.
When it gets into post, obviously the editor, they would use the higher format. And as we know, audio takes up way more space than camera. So it's pretty easy to back up a day's recording pretty quickly. Obviously, we use hard drives, but I would still say I would always record at the highest necessary
file
format. So we're talking 24-bit, 48K. That gives us the most information generally you need if you're recording sound effects that need to be stretched and mingled. Let's say we're doing a Transformers movie, for example. You require that higher sample rates, 96. So there's more information there to record. Right. But for the general recording every day 24-bit, 48K. Of course, there's 32-bit float now that saves you if you have very dynamic levels. Right. I wouldn't go below 24-bit if not, you're going to sound like Mario. 8-bit, 16-bit. So 24-bit, 48K is the standard that we would record at.
Right. All right. Backups and redundancy.
Right.
If need be, do you take the same process or same? So for me, I generally tell people always backup files.
Yeah, always.
And always make a backup of the backup.
Yeah.
Within sound, do you take that same approach too as well?
Of course. Talking about backups, as we said, and redundancy. As I told you, this machines like this record, on 2 separate mediums. Not in every case I would have to record a lower, as we talked about, MP3. So I would generally use the second card as a backup. My first line of backup. I would always hand off the other one to the DIT or who is ever backing up the medium. But I'll always keep a card, so I can keep a card in here for a couple days, and that would generally be my backup until it gets full. Then I will back it onto the hard drive. But the card that goes to DIT usually gets formatted for each day,
right?
Which is generally easier. It saves space, and you always have a fresh card to start with at the beginning of each day. But besides the redundancy here, obviously, just like camera, you do it on your hard drives as well, and multiple hard drives if need be, depending on how important the project is.
Right. All right, my friends, there you have it. More information on the how-to of sound. Travis, I want to thank you again for being such a lovely guest. Travis, once again, how can people find you on social?
You can find me on Instagram. My handle is TJ_Springer. You can find my email or my website, travisjspringer.com.
All right. And there you have it. If you need a fantastic sound recordist, Travis is your guy. I want to thank you all for viewing. Make sure and subscribe and like this channel, and you can find us on all things 13 on social media. So 13 Degrees North Productions, 13 Degrees North Rentals on Facebook. We are 13 Degrees North, and I am Kurt Dawson, also known as the Caribbean Gaffer, and you can follow me on Instagram. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode of How To. Peace.